All right, welcome everybody. If you guys could hear me, just do me a huge favor and just type here in the group chat so I can take attendance. Very good. Yep, just type here so I can take attendance. All right, so just a couple updates. So this session is recorded, but one of the things LAUSC does not want us to do is they don't want us to record your audio responses. So with that in mind, what I will do is we're going to try this. I will pause it once some of you guys share. Then I'm just going to paraphrase what some of your responses are because I have gotten some feedback where students have said that they do enjoy just hearing the student responses because it helps them with their LEQs as well as their just with their assignments in general, right? Um, so I always want to do a quick check-in. So with the check-in, what we will do is we'll go ahead and just answer these three questions right here. So overall, we're going into week 2 now. If you can kind of just share for me how your learning experience has been, not just in this class, but just in school as a whole. How is the second week of the shelter in place / pandemic? How are you doing? And just give me one positive. I think it's always important to kind of just look at the uh, positive, what we can get from this, and just be an optimist. So let's get started. Just raise your hand. Can I have just okay. Uh, so for this week, here's what we have. Thank you for getting in your chapter 35 notes that were due yesterday. Thank you very much. If you did the GRQ, make sure that you get that in. If you have not gotten that, I'm flexible knowing the times that we're in. Please get that in, as well as your LEQ because it is a big part of your grade. Period 4 and 5, I do have all of your Roaring 20s LEQs graded. I do have some of period 1 graded. My goal is to knock that out hopefully today. Overall, I'm very happy. There were a lot of 5s and 6s. Keep up the good work. Only feedback for improvement, I would say, just make sure that you're addressing the skill of the prompt. Change in continuity, cause and effect, compare and contrast, whatever it may be. If you do that, you'll earn at least 1 to 2 points more. Tomorrow, which is Wednesday, make sure you get your notes for chapter 36. Chapter 36 is the last chapter that we will cover before the AP exam, which I'll talk about in a second. Thursday, we will have a Zoom session for right now. As of right now, we still do have a Thursday Zoom session. I do have some meetings I think Dr. Usmani wants me to go to. So if I cannot do the Zoom session, don't sweat it. We'll work. I'll let you guys know. We'll find something out. I mean, it's this 10:30 a.m. session that's most likely going to be scrapped. Noon and then the 3:30 session. I think those are good. Right. Friday, if you do not attend the session, make sure you guys view the videos. I am going to, of course, upload this video on YouTube. Use it or every video, every session on YouTube. So if you miss one, just make sure you turn in the notes to me on Schoology. In fact, with all of these assignments, if you emailed me any of your LEQs or notes, just make sure that you upload on Schoology because I'm literally getting probably about 100 emails every day, and I don't want your email to get lost, right? Are you going to do a reading on chapter 35? Yes, I do. So Maria, I actually have it done already, but I was having some connectivity issues last night, so I couldn't upload it. So I'll go ahead and upload it for you. I'll also upload chapter 36. I'll try to get that done as well. I don't know if I'll be able to get it done by Wednesday, but I'll have it done Thursday latest. Okay. Sorry, Aaron, if I did not respond to your email. I probably just didn't see it because every time someone turns in a Schoology email, I get or a Schoology assignment, I get an email for it. So my email literally is like just bombarded. So if I don't email you once, I'd say after 3-4 hours, email me again. Don't take offense to it. It's just, it's my email is literally like a lot. Okay. And then on Sunday, you have your SAQ. I'm leaning toward an SAQ. It's not. I'm almost positive it's not going to be an LAQ. But the SAQ will be based off of the 2 questions that I gave you through our lecture today. So when you get that SAQ, just make sure that you turn that in by the day that we're aiming for is Sunday, as well as a multiple choice. Right? questions on that? All right. So now let's talk about the AP exam and as well as the IB exams. So as you may know, for the AP exams, your AP exams are going to be taken at home. College Board will let me know the exact date in which those exams will be implemented, no later than April 3rd. So as of right now, all AP exams, no multiple choice, all going to be free response. 45 minutes, 45 minutes. So yes, your 3-hour AP exam is now turned into a 45-minute exam. I do not know what it's going to look like. They'll let me know. So, it might be 3 SAQs. It might be 1 LAQ. It might be a shortened DBQ. I have no idea what it is, but it will be 45 minutes. That's how long it will take you. You'll take it at home. Word on the street is you could use your computer. You might take a photo of what you've handwritten. But that's just generally, it's all writing. Content-wise, what we're looking at is everything up until World War II. So if your teacher has done a good job of pacing your curriculum, which I'm going to flex a little bit on here, we have done that, then you're good to go. In fact, I could stop teaching you right now, chapter 35 and 36, and you will know enough content to do well on that exam, right? But we will continue. And here's the reason why. It is because, so we're going to finish at chapter 36, because 36 is Cold War. If you look at the very, 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 very last objective and key concept for AP in period 7, where the content stops, it says consequences of World War II. And the Cold War is a consequence of World War II. So we're going to talk about some of that. All right. So, and also I do not want to start reviewing too early either. The last thing I would want to do is start reviewing now. Then all of a sudden, AP is like, hey, we're going to take that exam May 20th. And then now we have 2 months worth of information or 2 months of review time. You're not going to remember what we review right now. So that's why I want to get through this unit. And then next week we'll do a little bit of 36 and then we'll start reviewing once we get back. Okay. IB exams. I don't think juniors, for history, you guys aren't really affected by that because it is the IB seniors whose external assessments are canceled. But for IB, for IB juniors in terms of history, you guys are okay. Questions? Any questions? To write it in the chat box and I will answer them. Comments? Concerns? Nothing? Nope. Good. So one of the things that some students ask is, what are we going to do after we finish chapter 36? We'll review. Then once we're finished with the AP exam, we're going to go over just some of the remaining chapters, because we can't just look at U.S. history and be like, hey, World War II happens and then nothing else happens. No, because we still have a lot of the civil rights movements, which I think explain a lot of the issues that we're going through today, the good and the bad, right? Good? All right. So with that in mind, let's move forward. These are the 2 questions that if you were to be given an LAQ, they would show up. But also, if you were given an SAQ, the SAQ is going to focus on these 2 topics. So here it is. There are 3 questions we're going to look at today. We're going to go back into the home front question that I had for you guys. And then we're also going to look at explain the causes of Allied victory during World War II. Allied wins, no surprise. You guys know that, but we got to talk about what leads to that victory. Then we're going to look at explain the extent to which the international role of the United States changes as a result of World War II. So, United States becomes a world power. Why? Why is it that we become a world power? What are the effects of this? Okay? But before we begin, and I'll come back to that slide periodically, I want to just kind of go over your LEQs and discuss some of the things that you guys wrote down in terms of how did World War II change in the home front. This was some evidence that you guys could use or that you could have used. So I want you to take notes on this video and explain to me, based on this video, how the home front changed. Please let me know if you can't hear the video because there's been some issues with sound recording. There we go.
The Zoot Suit Riots. In June of 1943, the city of Los Angeles experienced one of the most significant episodes of racial violence in the 20th century, known as the Zoot Suit Riots. Racial tensions had been rising in the city and were made only worse by the biased reporting of the Los Angeles media. When a group of American sailors attacked a group of mostly Mexican Americans in East LA, the city exploded. In hindsight, this seemed inevitable. With many young men overseas as a result of World War II, labor in the United States was in short supply. So in 1942, the US government reached a deal with Mexico named the Bracero Program, which allowed some Mexican citizens to move to the US as temporary workers. Los Angeles already had a large Mexican American population, but this new influx of workers provoked greater racial animosity. Much of the white population, whose views were echoed in the mass media, blamed Mexican American teenagers and young adults for various issues in the city, especially crime. Even the way Mexican Americans dressed angered the city's more conservative population. Many young Mexican Americans started donning the zoot suit, a style that incorporated an oversized coat, pork pie hat, long chain, thick-soled shoes, and baggy pants. This fashion evolved out of Harlem nightclubs and was popularized by cultural icons like Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway. The suits themselves weren't inherently offensive, but in the context of World War II, they were. You see, during the war, wool had been rationed in order to make uniforms for the troops. The very manufacturing of zoot suits with their excessive use of fabric was banned, but a black market developed, and so those zoot suit wearing Mexican Americans, known as pachucos, were seen as unpatriotic. On the night of August 1st, 1942, pachucos were involved in a brawl in a home near Los Angeles' Sleepy Lagoon. Next morning, the body of Jose Diaz was discovered nearby. The media and police quickly blamed the zoot suit wearing 38th Street gang. Hundreds of pachucos were rounded up, regardless of affiliation. 22 were eventually found guilty for the Sleepy Lagoon murder in what was later considered a great miscarriage of justice. To some, the verdict was grossly unfair. To others, it confirmed what they already believed, that the zoot suit wearers were inherently violent. This all helped to create a powder keg bound to explode. A few months later, a group of 16 American sailors stationed in Los Angeles claimed they were verbally taunted by a group of Pachuco zoot suiters. Seeking retaliation, the servicemen took cabs over to the Mexican neighborhoods in East LA and started attacking those wearing zoot suits with makeshift weapons. The Pachucos were thrown into the street, their zoot suits torn off and burned on the spot. The ensuing riot continued to snowball over the following days. Violence spread to include both Pachucos and young African American men. But instead of arresting the attackers, police arrested the victims, supposedly for their own protection. By June 8th, the rioting had become so severe that all military personnel were banned from Los Angeles, and military police were brought in to subdue the attackers. Miraculously, no one was killed, but the impact of the Zoot Suit riots would reach far beyond the number of casualties. Once the dust had settled, Governor Earl Warren commissioned a report that was meant to paint Californians in a more positive light. Instead, the Independent Citizens Commission found the chief cause of the riots was racism, naming the city's newspapers for encouraging the riots and the city government and U.S. military for allowing those riots to continue. Historians view the Zoot Suit riots as a culmination of anti-Mexican racism that had been building for years in Los Angeles, exacerbated by the stresses of World War II. The riots forced the country to face these problems head-on and confront the systemic oppression faced by Mexican Americans in Los Angeles and throughout the country.
All right, so what I'd like you guys to go ahead and do is I'll give you about a minute, just type in the chat box, how did World War II change the home front according to that video? Try to be as specific as possible. I'm going to give you guys about a minute and a half. We'll listen to some Beatles. I'll take some music requests. So go for it.
And when the night is cloudy, there is still the light that shines on me. Shine until tomorrow, let it be. I wake up to the sound of music from the man it comes to me. Speaking letters of wisdom, let it be. 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 Found the pretty answer. Let it be. Let it be. Let it be. As for the massive barrel in the marketplace, all it is in my little life. There's possessive money that I like on place, and mommy says that we take it.
All right, a minute and a half. So let's take a look at this. Seeing a lot of strong comments. Can I get some people just to volunteer and kind of just maybe elaborate or read theirs? That way we get more social interaction. Anybody want to share? Anybody? Come on, don't you want to talk a little bit? You know, I feel like, yeah, let's go. Let's go. Gustavo, I think you had a very strong response. Can you share, Gustavo? Thank you. I mean, all in all, and I'm just going to paraphrase. So Gustavo said in his response that changing the war front, more jobs need to be filled because men were going to war overseas. So we're getting the Bracero program that comes into power. And what this Bracero program does, if you see the next slide right there, is it's creates jobs for Mexican agricultural workers to harvest fruit and grain. But there's a lot of racial tension that exists because a lot of people were wearing zoot suits, and it wasn't just Mexicans that were, right? Because they were wearing these zoot suits, there were some people that saw this as unpatriotic, which would lead to the zoot suit riots, right? Question that I want you to think about. I mean, we're going through a time of high tension and high stress. As a result of this high tension and high stress, as a result of the pandemic that we're in, have you noticed any racial tension that exists? Yeah. I'm seeing a lot of you guys kind of just saying that is that there is. And I think that when we're studying history, we need to be cognizant about that. We can't let history repeat itself. When you're looking at World War II, you're getting racial tension. When Mexican and Mexican Americans, you know, they're being blamed as being unpatriotic. You're getting Japanese internment that are being accused of being spies, and yet not one was found guilty of being a spy, right? When you're looking at what's going on now, right? Before I get too political with this, I mean, and what I'm thinking is, what I'm saying isn't necessarily political. I think it's just speaking the truth of what things should be said and not be said. Is when the president comes out and says things and calling this, for example, the Chinese flu or the Chinese virus. That is not true. And he needs to understand this is a world pandemic, and we need to be cautious about the things that we say, right? Because it could evoke hatred. It could evoke irrational behavior. And that's some of the things that we're seeing right now, right? We cannot let history repeat itself. We can't, okay? And just reading some of the comments that you guys are writing on here is that people are ignorant, and I think that the more we could educate, you know, I'm speaking to the choir here. I mean, you guys are great. Literally, I mean, your APUSH is one of my favorite classes I've ever taught. your group, your cohort is probably one of my favorites because you guys bring in such insight. And I think if for most of you, or I think if most of the world had the same open mindedness that most of you guys have, then the world would be a better place. Any questions, comments? All right, let's move on to the next thing. So one of the questions that I am going to ask you guys, and it might be an LEQ later on, but it's definitely going to be mentioned in SAQ, was how did the Allies win the war? How did it lead to victory? Not going to lie, these two videos are actually two examples of losses, right? In the ways that the United States actually took the L. They take the L, but I'll tell you what, later on it leads to victory. So what I want you to do is watch these videos. Tell me the significance of the Bataan Death March, but also how does this lead to Allied victory, right? How does it lead to Allied victory, right? If you are a student that's lived in the Philippines or a Filipino American, feel free to bring in any insight that you have regarding your family's account or perspective on these two events. Well, that's the answer, but here we go.
Marine Corporal Glenn McDowell from Urbandale was stationed at the Cavite Naval Base on the Philippine Islands. Locked in a battle that would last 5 months, McDowell and his buddies soon came to the conclusion no reinforcements were coming to their rescue.
We knew there was no way in heaven acres, after we'd heard what happened at Pearl Harbor, that we was going to get any help.
Eventually, the larger Japanese force prevailed. An official surrender by American troops in the Philippines was announced on April 9, 1942. McDowell fought on until May 6th.
I'll tell you, the most sick feeling you get when you look up and see Old Glory come down and a Japanese flag goes up, just made you feel like a bunch of men without a home.
Army Corpsman Malcolm Amos of Afton was among those captured on April 9th. He became one of more than 75,000 Allied forces, including an estimated 12,000 Americans who were forced to walk the 60 miles from the Luzon Island to the American military base, Camp Cubano. For 6 days, the men marched north with no food or water. It became known as the Bataan Death March. Anyone who was injured, fell behind, or attempted to escape was killed. An estimated 10,000 men died. 5,000 of them were Americans.
When we got into Camp O'Donnell, the rice was moldy, full of bugs, maggots, all that kind of stuff. And they cooked all that stuff up, and it was kind of like a porridge. And the guys looked at that, some of them looked at that and said, well, I'm not eating that kind of crap. And they just took and dumped her. And those people are still over there in the Philippines because they just starved to death because that's the only thing there was to eat.
Both McDowell and Amos eventually wound up at the Cabanatuan prison camp, but they didn't meet each other until years after the war. McDowell, seeing the high death rate and lack of medical attention available to the men, volunteered for work details away from Cabanatuan. The work details finally took him to the Palawan prison camp on Palawan Island. He helped build an airfield.
We didn't classify. I'm Army or you're Marine. We were just all a bunch of little American fellas sticking together. And I don't believe, in fact, I know we were all closer than really brothers.
All right, there's the first video. Here is the second. That's not it. Here is the second.
It was called a death march, not because of how many died. Of the 12,000 Americans, only about 1,700 lived to come home. But they called it a death march because of the way they died. If you stopped on the road, you were killed. If you had a malaria attack, they killed you. If you had to stop to defecate, they killed you. If you just couldn't take another step, they killed you. And how did they kill you? They'd either bayonet you to death, shoot you, or in some cases decapitate you. They did not give us water. They gave us no food. the temperature was about 108 degrees. The Americans that were captured, a good 80% of them had malaria. Another 50% had dysentery. So we were gunshot wounds, malaria, dysentery, and we had to walk this distance that they wanted us to. Under these conditions, it was unbearable. I think that what kept me going is this: about the second day, I made the decision that the only way I was going to survive was if I started to set goals for myself. And I would walk and I would see a herd of caribou in the distance. And I would say to myself, I must get to that herd of caribou. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know how far they were. I didn't know how many days it was going to take me or how many hours, but I made every effort to get to that herd of caribou. No matter what happened. The Japanese told me to smile, I did. They told me to sit, I sat. They told me to march, I marched. They hit me, it was okay. They broke my nose, knocked my teeth out. They split my head open, but I still had to go to reach those herd of caribou. Then when I got to the herd of caribou, then I'd find another goal, and another goal, and another goal. Every day was another goal. From that day on, I've lived my whole life that way. And those people who hold on to a grudge, I think, have a very different philosophy of life. And that's how they live. By not holding on to a grudge, by being able to roll with the punch, I think it's a lot easier to live. My life is a lot happier because I've learned how to adjust to adversities and how to deal with it.
I'm going to stop it right there. So take about a minute and a half. If you can, just tell me, why was the Bataan Death March significant? Just give me some details that stood out to you, as well as how it led to the Allied victory. If you know any more information about the Death March, feel free to, or the incident, just feel free to address that in the chat box as well. So I'll give you guys about a minute and a half. Please, everyone participate, share your responses, and we'll bring it back to whole group. So Kalen says, wouldn't the atrocities that occurred during the Death March have spurred more support for winning the war because of increasing nationalism? Yeah, that's definitely true. That's why this is significant. It gave Japan an advantage in the Pacific, right? Because they captured the Philippines. Very good. So one thing you want to understand is that this is actually helping helping Japan, right? This is an American loss. But what we need to understand is why it's an American loss. What leads us to having this loss? The significance of the Bataan Death March, Quinn and Marie, was that it angered Americans due to the treatment of the soldiers. Yep. Can I get a volunteer just to kind of share? Why was there a lack of support in the Philippines during this time? This is Pearl Harbor happened in December, right? So this is the same year as Pearl Harbor. However, this was in the spring. Very good. Germany first. ABC. What do we mean by that? Henry, is your microphone working? Can you elaborate? Because you are correct.
Wait, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Wait, did you guys hear me?
Excellent. You're right on. So I want to understand that, first off, this Death March is very significant because it is increasing nationalism. You're looking at the way that the Japanese are treating the Filipinos and the Americans. I mean, this is another atrocity. This is another atrocity that's similar to the Nanking Massacre, right? When you're getting Filipinos that are forced to go ahead, and Americans forced to go march 80 miles, right, in the humid Philippines spring. So it's probably close to 89 degrees at that point on average per day with high humidity. So it's another student in the previous session asked if there's any animosity still today between the Philippines and Japan. Does anyone have the response to that? So it's going to vary. The older generation, yes. There are some of the older generation that still is angered about what's happened. When you look at the younger generation, they're a little bit, I guess you could say, more distant from the events of World War II. So they've learned to forgive and kind of move on. Myself, my brother, he is still, has a lot of animosity towards the Japanese. When I talked to him about it, I asked him, can we move forward? And he's looks at it from like our family side of it, where we actually used to have a bread shop. Like the Burbas actually used to own like a bread store, like we'd sell pan de sal, and the Japanese burned that down during World War II. And myself living in America, it's different being a Filipino American than uh, living in the Philippines, right? I mean, my brother, he still has not moved on from that. But moving forward here, Henry described this perfectly. This leads to Allied victory, specifically because of the ABC-1 agreement. And Helene mentioned this as well, is that the reason why the Bataan Death March happens is specifically because America chooses this Germany first strategy. This Germany first strategy means that we need to focus specifically on the battle in Europe or the war in Europe, because if Great Britain or the Soviet Union is defeated, that means that we are left alone to fight Japan as well as Germany. We do not want that to happen. So this is a successful strategy. It really is. I mean, Germany is able to fall as a result of this. So if you're writing your LAQ, you want to make sure you mention this ABC-1 agreement, although it is a temporary setback as a result of losing the Philippines. It leads to the overall success of the United States because we're able to defeat Germany. I want you to go ahead and just type what is going on here. So what is going on here? So if you know the answer, very good. Island hopping, leapfrogging. Let's get Carolyn. Can you explain to me why island hopping is a successful strategy that leads to Allied victory? So we're looking at island hopping as a successful strategy because what it's allowing the United States to do is bypass heavily fortified Japanese ports, nearing themselves closer to Japan and establishing airfields on those islands, right? One of the things that they're also able to do is once again deprive Japan of their specific supplies, right? If we go back to this map, a lot of this starts off in the United States or Pearl Harbor, right? The Hawaii. Once we start to develop more air bases, we're able to get closer to Japan, which allows for bombing, right? One of the advantages that the United States has over Japan and as well as Germany is we have aircraft carriers, and also our airplanes also have larger engines, so they're able to go longer distances. They could go from these islands all the way to Japan more easily versus the Luftwaffe, which is blitzkrieg, lightning war, bomb, get out, go back, right? Eventually, yeah, we'll talk about Japan's strategy later. Questions? All right, so know what island hopping is. Another piece of evidence that you could use if that would show up on LAQ is D-Day. So what I want you to do is watch this video and explain to me how D-Day leads to Allied victory. You could also use the synonym Battle of Normandy, right? This is a must. You got to know. A lot of people will bring up D-Day in World War II, and after this, you'll know why.
Well, D-Day was obviously the most important single fight of that war. And of course, had we lost it, there's no telling what the outcome would have been.
Since the American entry into the war, American generals had been agitating for an opportunity to fight the Germans directly. The D-Day invasion of Normandy in June 1944, represented the cutting edge of this offensive.
Essential condition that underwrote the success of D-Day was the fact that Germany had been bled virtually to death by fighting on the Eastern Front for several years against the Red Army in the Soviet Union before D-Day ever happened.
So the Germans had been preparing for this invasion as long as the Americans and the British had been, and they had been digging in. And they knew that they could inflict appalling casualties on the first units ashore. Well, Somebody had to do it. And so the soldiers fought. And indeed, those first units did suffer very high rates of death and wounding.
It's one thing to go on a beach with sand dunes. It's something else when you've got enemy on top of these bluffs. And for some reason, naval gunnery was either off or something went wrong there. They couldn't destroy those gun emplacements.
But eventually, the weight of the invasion took hold. The numbers of Americans, the numbers of craft, allowed the Americans and the British to establish a beachhead. And once they established a beachhead, then they could bring more and more soldiers and equipment ashore.
One thing I don't think either the Japanese or the Germans really counted on was what it meant to come up against a massive capitalist industrial power. The ability to build stuff on a massive scale with massive numbers was just something they hadn't really anticipated.
If you look back at the old photographs and the footage of that armada out there off the coast, I don't think they've ever assembled before, after, anything like that.
Eventually, it was the technology, it was the weight of American capital that tipped the balance. But at the very beginning, it was the soldiers, the ones who splashed ashore, the ones who knew that in the first wave, lots and lots of them would never come back. And those are the ones who made possible everything that followed.
The Rangers who went in first and the waves that came after them stood right up to it. There was more bravery that day than one can hardly imagine.
All right, take about a minute and a half. Write your responses. How did D-Day lead to Allied victory? Here we go. Let me give you your song. Minute and a half. They took back France. I want you to think, why is France so important? 15 seconds. Still haven't seen the answer I want. There's one answer that I'm looking for. All these answers are correct. Oh, all right. Okay, so let's hear some of these responses. Okay. So yes, France is taken back, right? But what's so important about France? Why do we care that France is being taken over? What could be a reason why? Any guesses? Let's go. What do you think? Chan, what do you think?
So if they take back France, doesn't that...
Very good. So another access point. If they have another access point, who are they fighting on the Eastern Front? Who's on the East? If France is on the West, who's on the East? Russia. So the main thing you understand about why D-Day is so important is because Germany is now, once again, fighting a two-front war, right? They are going ahead and surrounding Germany. Very important thing you understand. I can't remember which historian it was, but one of the things that they said was that The Allies were victorious because of British intelligence. British intelligence, they developed the radar that were able to use to stop the Luftwaffe. And it was also won by American goods because of how fast we were able to produce these aircraft carriers, these airplanes. But it was also won because of Soviet blood. Soviet blood. That's one of the reasons why, right? Because when you're looking at Soviet blood, I mean, Stalin, he was able to stall Hitler on the Eastern Front, right? Lost a lot of lives, but he was successful in doing so. This also starts some tension. So the response that I'm looking for is this. D-Day is very important because of the Tehran Conference. The Tehran Conference, this was in 1942, but prior to that, Russia stalled Germany, right? They were able to stop Hitler expanding eastward, right? He was also getting very upset. Hitler was very upset specifically because the Allies had not went ahead and developed footing on the Western Front. In fact, the Allied strategy was, and by Allies I'm talking about Great Britain and the United States, what they said, let's go ahead and make our way through Northern Africa, and then we'll go ahead and attack through Italy. Let's go ahead and get Italy. Well, if you're Russia, you're not happy. You're not happy because that's not taking the pressure off of you in the Eastern Front. German troops were still sending so many troops eastward. I mean, America's fighting Italy at that point, right? So Russia is not happy at all. When we get to the Tehran Conference is important because it plans D-Day, right? And once D-Day happens, Russia, a lot of that pressure is taken off of them. Hitler has to move those troops westward. Does that make sense? If that makes sense, type yes. If it does not make sense, type no. Go for it. Okay. And we can see this here, right? So one of the things that we notice is that if you look on the, right over here, look at these dates. Right, let's look at some of these dates. So we're looking at Stalingrad, right here. We're getting 1942 and 1943, right? You're getting Leningrad besieged. 1941 and 1944. So all of these are 1941 and 42. Very early, right? I'd say not early in the war, but when we're looking at this is early in the stages of when Germany would go ahead and attack the Soviet Union. But now let's look at the Western Front here, right? So when we're looking back down here is if you look at Italy, Rome is liberated in 1944. Well, let's look when D-Day happens. June 6, 1944. So what this tells us is the Allied strategy is starting in North Africa in 1943. If you're starting in North Africa, none of this in the Eastern Front, there is no pressure that's being taken off the Soviet Union. But once they make their way westward, you're going to start to see Germany start to become suffocated, right? So make sure you mention that is D-Day Tehran Conference. Okay. So a couple things that we want to get here is the last days of Hitler, and I'm going to go walk to my kitchen table because I am running out of battery. All right, so the Soviets reached Berlin in 1945. By April 1945, Hitler goes ahead and commits suicide. Right around that same time, Roosevelt dies in April 12, 1945, and of course, you're getting courageous Truman taken over. On May 7, 1945, the German government surrenders, and officially May 8th, we have VE Day, Victory in Europe, right? So that kind of gives you the time frame of how busy that spring was, right? But let's move on. So that's stuff that you want to definitely mention in your LEQ. If your audio is stopping at all, what I recommend that you do is just go back and watch it. All right. No, we never want to honor Hitler. So here is the second possible LEQ that you could get. And this is actually our last objective for the AP exam here. Explain the extent at which the international role of the United States changed as a result of World War II. So what I want you to do is, sorry, Carolyn, I should, explain the extent to which the international role of the United States changed as a result of World War II. That's your question that you will need to answer. I want you to tell me the message of this cartoon. So I'll give you about a minute and a half. Go for it.
I'm not half the man I used to be. Why she had to go, I don't know. She wouldn't say. I said something wrong. Now I long for yesterday. Nothing you can say will put me some. Nothing you can say, but you learn how to play the game. Easy. Nothing you can make the conversation.
All right, all very good responses, right? So let's just chat about this cartoon here a little bit. It's going to call on some people. Let me pause it. This cartoon, this is the Yalta Conference. This is Yalta Conference, and we have these three men, Churchill, Stalin, FDR. This is the last conference before, rest in peace, FDR passes away and Truman takes over. But the world is dying, and it's up to these three men to heal the world, to make the world a better place for you and for me, and of course, for world peace. That's what we end up getting, right? That's the purpose of this. And you can see this. I mean, you can tell the world's dying. Look at the frail hand. But let's see if this Yalta Conference was successful. Yalta Conference, this is when we start to see the United States rise as a world power, or one of the ways. And what I want you to do is take a look at this. These are the provisions. Your textbook, I think, could have done a better job of just being more straightforward with it. And I want you to tell me, who is the winner looking at the Yalta Conference? Who do you think the winner is? And just give me the reason why. Is it Russia, United States, Great Britain, or is everyone the winner? So I'll give you guys about a minute and a half. Tell me who is a winner and why. And you are correct. Stalin does break a lot of promises. But why, or who is the winner at this point? Go for it. Just write it in the chat.